Welcome to the Changelog episode 0.6.9. I'm Adam Stacoviak.
And I'm Wynn Netherland. This is the Changelog. We cover what's fresh and new and open source. If you found us on iTunes, we're also on the web at thechangelog.com. We're also up on GitHub.
Head to github.com/explore. You'll find some training reposts, some feature reposts from our blog, as well as the audio podcast. If you're on Twitter, follow Changelog Show and me, Adam Stack.
And I'm Penguin, Pengwynn. Fun episode this week. Talked to the guys over at Spree, Sean and Brian, about the recent funding round and the latest developments with Spree.
You know, this is some really good news for the open source community. I mean, on top of this funding, as well as Appcelerator's recent $15 million, this is exciting news.
Yeah, it's fun to watch projects get some backing, allow them to do some things they normally wouldn't get to do. SpreeConf is one of those for the Spree community. There's going to be a conference February 15th, 16th in New York City that hope to see you there. Excellent lineup of speakers. And
if you really want to make it, it's not a bad price out of $99 to get registered.
That's a cheap conference.
That's a really good conference ticket.
I'm excited to be there. It's a fun episode this week. Should we get to it?
Let's do it.
I'm chatting today with Sean Schofield and Brian Quinn from the Spree project. So, Sean, you first want to introduce yourself and your role over at Spree.
I'm Sean Schofield. I'm the creator of Spree and co-founder of SpreeCommerce and CEO at the new company that we've just established.
Brian, what's your role over there?
I'm the CTO of SpreeCommerce Inc. and a longtime contributor to Spree.
So for those that don't know, Sean, why don't you give a little background about the Spree project and what it is?
The Spree project is a open source e-commerce platform for Ruby on Rails that started about a little over 4 years ago under an original name was called RailsCart. So it's kind of evolved to this point, and I can give you a little more background later if you want to know more about the history. But
so how long?
That's the gist of it.
How long ago was it RailsCart?
Over 4 years ago. I think the first blog post to the Spree user mailing list was over 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago.
It's gone, I guess, through a couple of transformations. It's now a Rails engine, right?
Yeah. We've steadily kind of evolved with Rails, and in some cases, maybe even influenced the direction Rails has gone in subtle but important ways. So we were definitely a proponent of more engines and that kind of functionality in Rails, and the core team listened. So which is good. So
how big was the move to Rails 3.1 for Spree?
I'll let Brian, do you want to handle that one since you did the
Yeah, sure. It was a pretty big job because prior to Rails 3, we had been using kind of our own version of extensions, which were basically engines, but they were kind of shoehorned into Rails. So we had a very kind of rough boot process, and it was a pretty rough experience. So with the move to Rails 3, then we were able to basically back out all that code and just completely embrace the Rails 3 style of engines. So yeah, it was a pretty massive change. All right, I think it started around RailsConf in Baltimore. I think it was the first time in the first RailsConf in Baltimore was when we actually started working on it. When we managed to get some time together at the excellent BoConf there. So. Yeah, it took, I think we were about 9 months actually working on that release until we got the 0.30 release, which was the first one to support Rails 3. So,
and Rails 3.1 was almost as complicated, it turned out.
Yeah, absolutely, because the asset pipeline and other features like that really took us a while to get that integrated. And I think we probably jumped on the Rails 3.1 migration a little bit too early because the core team were still settling down on exactly what Sprockets was doing and what features were where. So we were kind of chasing the mark for a few weeks there until it settled down. But it seems to be pretty solid now with our latest 0.70.1 release is fully Rails 3.1.1 compliant.
So the Rails 3.1 asset pipeline's a two-edged sword. It streamlines a lot of the asset generation and makes assets first-class citizens of the project. But also it comes with a attacks for developers, I guess, during development mode where it's much slower.
Yeah, absolutely. And like one of the great things about the asset pipeline and how it works with engines is it gives you great like modularity in that, an engine can bring along a little piece of JavaScript or a CSS file, and they can all just marry in together into the final, assets for the project. So it's definitely phenomenal in that respect. But yeah, you do pay a price in terms of development performance. But there is Raycast now that will allow you to pre-compile your assets if you're not working on them in development mode, so you can completely pretty much remove the penalty for performance there.
So Rails engines, I guess for those that don't know, take advantage of open types in Rails so that you can include models, views, controllers from an engine and override them in your own project and really exploit that feature of Ruby. Talk a bit about how many different touch points are in the application that you can customize to suit your needs.
Yeah, well, like you said, like an engine is really just a Rails application. So, it provides that mechanism to bundle in all your controllers and models. And then basically we kind of add in this extra layer that we call decorators, which is a pretty common idiom for development, where you can basically take a class, like say the product model, and open it up, change whatever methods or add methods that you need to add to it, extend it with new associations or whatever. So your host application takes in Spree as an engine, and then, can bend it to your exact requirements. And then there's a huge a collection of extensions, like third-party extensions that are available and listed on our website, that you can go and pull down extra features like wish lists and social integration. There's countless other extensions I've already written, so you can also tie those in at the same time into your host application and customize it exactly the way you want to.
So beyond that, Spree is also not just a monolithic gem. It's made up of parts that you can use a la carte, right?
Yeah, and I just want to add on the engines thing. I think that the engines development in Rails was like super important. And I think we're only just starting to see some of the benefits of it. They started out. I mean, there was a project called Engines, that was a separate sort of unrelated project with the same name, that initially I think was disparaged a bit, by DHH and others. They didn't want that part of Rails, but ultimately they came around to something that was pretty close to what people were doing outside of the Rails project. Radiant in particular had adopted an extension mechanism that that influenced us, and that in turn influenced the direction I think that the Rails team went. But we're only just now starting to see people really kind of. I think the documentation was fairly limited, and just I don't know. It just took people a while to kind of grasp what the power of engines really means. And now we're starting to see some of the more major Rails open source projects moving to engines. Devise has been, I guess, an engine for a little while, but projects like Radiant and Refinery, and now there's this forum and Rails admin. I'm starting to see more and more engines, and now we're going to start to see what can happen when you combine them all. And I think that's been a huge development for Rails.
You mentioned Devise. I guess Devise is part of Spree with Spree Auth. What other popular plugins make up the architecture for Spree?
We're using Kaminari for paging.
Pagination.
Yeah, we were using Will Paginate dependencies because Rails 3 actually helped us in that way, because so many things broke at Rails 3, and then we just didn't. We ended up kind of coming up with our own Rails 3 compatible solution, or moving to that was a big consolidation of our dependencies, because a lot of older projects just never got upgraded, never made it. That was Will Paginate finally kind of got there, but it took a long time, so that's why we moved to Kaminari and Search Logic. Others we just kind of end up abandoning because they had stalled out a little bit, I guess, in terms of momentum, and so that was a period of consolidation for us.
It makes our job easier too, as we're migrating between versions of Rails. The less dependence we have on third-party gems, the less kind of forking and waiting around for libraries to get updated, or taking on a big job of updating a library. Like for our Rails 3 migration, we were using James Gollick's resource controller, and we had to port that to Rails 3, and that was in itself one of the biggest jobs of the Rails 3 migration. So as we're slowly kind of taking away as many dependencies as possible, and we're trying to keep Spree almost as a simple Rails application as possible, so to make our migrations easier between versions. But we do use a couple of other interesting gems like State Machine. Plugin. It's a good extension. We use it on for our checkout kind of State Machine, basically We also use Active Merchant, of course, from Shopify, which is a good payment gateway library.
Yeah, Active Merchant and Plug in a Week State Machine are good about updating. They're very active communities, and they're good about updating to the newest Rails, so we don't have a problem depending on them.
So quite a number of models here in Spree. If you go to the Spree Core App Models folder, I guess the good news is you can customize those if there's overlap with your application. I'm curious for most people when they're creating a Spree project, is it adding storefront features to an existing application, or are they starting with the store and building an application around it?
It's primarily been used up till now. It's primarily worked best as a standalone store that maybe then you add features around. I mean, that's kind of been the bias, I guess. But we are, there's no reason why that needs to be the case. There have been cases where there have been really mature Rails applications that Spree has been integrated in, but that's always been more difficult than it should be. But again, with engines and now namespacing that's supported in Rails 3.1, there's some really good opportunities to kind of break that assumption that the store is going to come first. So we're definitely very interested in being able to integrate with Refinery, Radiant, Browser, CMS, all the different open source CMSs. There's been a lot since I started Spree. One of the first questions on the user list was like, "Can I combine this with Radiant?" And people ask about every other week for that functionality. So the good news is that will be a reality soon. And because with engines, you can just drop them in any particular order, and it doesn't matter. But that's a pretty complicated exercise to really, because Spree is not some little widget that you drop into WordPress. Like, it's a huge, full-featured e-commerce engine, and there's authorization and authentication and admin stuff, reporting, and there's just a lot of interdependent pieces. But Rails is now sophisticated enough, and we now refined Spree enough so that this should be possible.
So Spree's had a couple, I guess, corporate sponsors over its lifespan, but just recently you guys formed SpreeConf, the company behind Spree. So why don't you talk a bit about that news?
Sure. I began Spree. Spree began as when I was a freelance consultant. So it really still solves that. It's still working on solving that problem that I noticed when I was first doing e-commerce. But over time, and then I was employed, by a couple different people that were interested in what we were doing, and it kind of being associated with that project brought them some, business, and but then really became big enough that I could justify kind of starting it. RailsDog, RailsDog was originally a blog and named after my dog, and then it just sort of evolved into a company. Ultimately, I didn't want a company that I didn't own or control to be sort of affiliated with the project anymore. So I just set it up as like, I'm going to kind of self-sponsor the project, and that was like sort of an intermediate kind of step. But then it quickly became like, wow, there's enough interest in here. I could probably just start a consulting company just around doing Spree work. So it kind of morphed into RailsDog, the consulting company, and we did that. And Brian is a long-time contributor through open source, and then he joined us at RailsDog, and so he was with me he was like the first employee at RailsDog, and then we just recently started this new company as a vehicle for the investment, and the separation there is really consulting. RailsDog is still like a consulting company. The new company, besides, investors aren't interested in consulting. They didn't really, help us build the consulting business, so we didn't really feel like we needed to cut them in on that. And, we wanted the ability, the whole point of getting the money was to really have the ability to focus on Spree and the product in the community and not the short-term kind of needs of clients. So there is this new company, SpreeConf Inc., which is now the custodian of the Spree source code and the current benefactor.
So when you mentioned getting the money, you're referring to the recent $1.5 million seed funding round led by True Ventures?
Yes, I am.
That's exciting.
Yes.
So how are you going to spend that?
Well, we've got a lot of different ideas. I mean, believe it or not, like the money can be spent and can be spent fairly quickly if one is not strategic about it. So, but our main thing is like there are a lot of, I guess, public goods. You know, have an econ background, so like a public goods kind of context where things that the free market would not take care of by itself. Like so, i.e., clients aren't going to pay for better documentation. Because once that the documentation exists, everyone can benefit from it, and they don't, they're not going to benefit proportionately to what it would cost to create it. So, but once we create a really great ecosystem, like with documentation and videos and other tutorials and things like this, then everybody can benefit. So that's an example of where, hey, we definitely plan to invest a lot more. I think we have pretty good documentation for an open source project, but now we can, really put more into documentation, training, answering, questions on user lists. We can dedicate a lot of resources. So that's like the first priority is to continue to nurture our growing ecosystem. And we have some ideas we can talk about a little bit later in the conference. Like I mentioned before we got on that thinking about a conference and some other ideas for the money.
So, yes, let's talk about that. When's the big date?
So we're going to do our first ever SpreeConf in New York City next February. It'll be February 15th and 16th. And so the site should be up by the time this airs, SpreeConf.com. And
is this geared towards developers or business folk or both?
Yes, I think it's geared towards developers, but also it would be appropriate for business owners that want to learn more about Spree. There'll be something for everybody, and there'll be opportunities to learn there. The first day, the 15th of February, will be training, and we're going to do a full day of training on, we'll probably break it up into half a day of Rails and a half a day on Spree, and then the second day will be talks. The training, so, if you want to learn more about Spree, there'll be the training, we'll have a hackathon, all the Spree, or most of the Spree core people will be there. Myself and Brian will be there, and there'll be a couple talks, like, a little bit more geared towards Spree, but then there'll be a lot of talks that are just going to be talking about general topics of Rails interest. So if you're in the New York City area or you want to come, so Wynn, you are scheduled to speak as well.
I would love to.
Yeah. But we haven't discussed a topic, but, we've penciled you in there. So, I think maybe we'll try to put things in a little bit of a Spree context when possible. But, I'd like to see some talks on CoffeeScript, and, we have a guy that's probably going to do a talk on recommendation engines. And, recommendations and the kind of algorithms that go into that and some of the kind of just general problems behind that sort of area are, I think would be of interest to anybody, doing Rails work, not just Spree people. So it's going to be kind of a crossover sort of thing. Our community isn't large enough really to warrant like a 3-day RailsConf extravaganza. And we're going to have some cool speakers and interesting people there. So Bree Pettis is going to be doing our keynote speaker. He's the CEO of MakerBot. So really cool company, and is really popular with the tech nerds. And he's going to do a demonstration and talk. And so I think it'll be cool just to go and, see him do his thing. But, Scott Chacon and some of the other usual people that you see at the, regional Ruby conferences will be there too. So, and GitHub's throwing the party afterwards. So definitely come by and see us.
Definitely worth it. I see Sticker Mule is in your success stories showcase on SpreeCommerce.com.
Yeah, well, the Sticker Mule guys will be there too. If you've ever bought stickers from them, come.
Love the stickers from Sticker Mule.
Yeah. They're probably our favorite Spree client. We love all our clients at Rails.org.
So what's the largest installation that you know of for Spree?
Okay. So let's see. Largest. Well, the largest, there are two large ones that use Spree to some degree or another. So one would be Shoedazzle. And Shoedazzle is a huge company. I think they're doing something like, this is not inside information, just whatever. It's rumored to be $100 million a year in sales in shoes, and that's Kim Kardashian's shoe company. So they had a Rails custom Rails solution, and they moved to Spree quite a while ago, like an older version of Spree. And they've customized it heavily since. So, it's not like, if you installed Spree, you will be, able to build Shoedazzle overnight or whatever. I mean, there's obviously a lot goes on top of it, but that's like a pretty big name client that's using it. The other is Second Life. Yeah, Second Life. So they are using a very customized version of Spree, even more so than Shoedazzle. But one thing I know that's fairly intact, and again, these guys started early, when Spree was a lot rougher. One thing that remains definitely intact, I've heard, in the Second Life installation was the data model. So you mentioned all the models, and you can kind of pick and choose. But interestingly, we get a lot of compliments on, oh, the data model is really good. Like that was like a big part of what they decided to use on that particular installation. But so we can go. So Spree is certainly suitable to either jumpstart or actually run like a very big, huge business. But there's also, we've got people who do a few $1,000 a month in sales, and then I think a good standard, be $25,000, $50,000 a month. There are a lot of stores that run in that range, some several hundred thousand. I mean, I won't get into the names and with figures, but.
So what sort of ecosystems cropping up around Spree for extensions and themes?
Well, the extension kind of ecosystem is pretty vibrant and pretty popular right now. Like if you go onto to GitHub and just search for repositories that start with Spree _, I think you'll get about 600 different repos, and that's not including forks. So like, because Spree has supported extensions since one of its earliest versions, there's always been a lot of activity there, and pretty much every kind of problem that you need to solve on a regular basis for an e-commerce store has been solved for one version of Spree or another. I guess one issue there really is, with any open source project, as the core product rolls forward, not all the extensions follow along. So there's obviously a big maintenance overhead there to support the huge community of extensions. But we maintain a pretty large collection of about 20 extensions that we classify as official extensions that get used an awful lot by the majority of stores, but yet don't warrant being in core itself. Stuff like Spree Social, which gives you integration with OmniAuth, so you can log on with Facebook and Twitter and other OAuth sources like that. There's Spree Active Shipping, which integrates with FedEx and UPS and USPS and all those other shipping APIs. There's countless others, PayPal Express, related products.
Yeah, it's a popular.
You name it, basically, somebody has already written an extension, and we've taken over a few of them as important extensions to maintain them going forward. So we also have a project called Rails Dog Radio, which is a kind of a large sample store of Spree. So it uses Spree, the core product, and then I think about 6 of the official extensions, and then a custom team as well, all rolled into one. And as part of our upgrade process for every version of Spree, we use it for dog fooding. So we go and we upgrade the Rails Dog Radio store to use the latest version of Spree, and then that kind of gets us started on upgrading all the official extensions. So the source for the Rails Dog Radio stores is available on GitHub as well. We'll give you links for that and whatever. So the Rails Dog Radio team is one of the first kind of. The teaming is a relatively new feature in Spree. It only came about with 070 release, which is only couple of weeks old. So the Rails Dog Radio team is one of the first teams built on Spree, and that's something we're actively looking at is building out more team extensions. But in Spree terminology, a team and an extension is the same thing, except a team really only changes the front end, doesn't bring any logic with it.
Yeah, so I wanted to go back to a couple of things Brian just mentioned, because it ties into the venture funding that we discussed before. The Rails Dog Radio, that is the official online demo. So it's like a fancier version. Spree is pretty bare bones when you install it, and intentionally so. So you can kind of add the theory as well. You can just tweak the UI with a theme and add extensions that you want. But there was 2 problems with just leaving it that way. One is that it's hard to tell people but it can do so much more. Just trust us. So we wanted to kind of sort of demonstrate, and then also people. Didn't want to, and also I think, it was helpful to kind of give people a jump start. So, we decided to build this Rails Dog Radio and make it open source. So that's all open source, but you can see it online, and then you can also just, get it from GitHub and use it as a starting point. All it is a gem file, pretty much, that references a bunch of other Spree engines, and it kind of shows you, It's like a reference implementation of Spree, I guess. But it took us a long time to do that. We did that through RailsDog, and with some of the proceeds, basically, because we had to pay the engineers who were working on it. I mean, and the artists who design it and things and whatever. We had to. It took us a long time to get to the point where we could do that because we're just so busy, taking care of our clients, which is what we should be doing when we're consultants. So, that would have gotten going a lot faster. And then there are things that still need to be done, which is like, hey, we need a lot more themes. We need better curation of the extensions. Like there are, outdated versions of almost everything you need, at least. But will it run on my version of Spree that I need? Maybe, maybe not, and so that's definitely going to be a point of emphasis for us. And again, having no client is going to pay for that, so that's something that's really important. But and now we can do.
You have anyone actually trying to buy things from RailsDog Radio and wondering why their products don't ship?
Yeah, occasionally. We try to warn them that
big
it's not a real
disclaimer,
store. Yeah. I don't even know if it takes real credit cards. I don't know. Yeah, but sorry, we'll issue a refund promptly. No, there's really nobody's cards are getting charged. So yeah, I know. Whatever. We do our best.
So you do have this is the online sandbox, but you do have an admin view of this too. If you want to unfurl your own sandbox, you got a script that will crank up a new Heroku instance for them and email.
Yeah. So now that won't, and so you won't get a RailsDog Radio one, but. Maybe we'll change that in the future. But the thing with RailsDog Radios is a huge actual product. So our friends, I should plug them. Okay, so if you do want a satellite radio, you should go to tssradio.com. And, they were nice enough to donate the product inventory. So, a big problem with e-commerce is not having enough real data. So we used a ton of real product data and SKUs and things like this just to make it kind of realistic. And so so that was nice. And eventually, people have been asking us, we just have to sanitize the data to make sure there's nothing in there that shouldn't be in there. And we'll probably make that open source too, the data set. But so people want to be able to see the back end admin functionality. And that's often very difficult. But all you have to do is plug in your email and, like you said, it'll spin up a Heroku instance. It won't be Rails.radio, Radio, but you'll be able to log in and like a lot of these demos for open source stuff, just like Spree included, it used to be like every half hour or hour we wipe out the database, So this way you get 14 days to kind of just play with it and, your data and your work won't be wiped out and you can kind of just show it to a client, noodle around on it, just to get an idea for how it works.
So the only thing I was disappointed with, I kicked the tires on that last night, is I guess I was expecting, since I used the same email address, to have ownership on the GitHub or the Heroku repo in that deal. That would have been a nice touch.
Yeah, there's one tiny technical flaw there is we use Amazon S3 for the image attachments. So our S3 credentials are tied into the account. So we haven't quite put the effort into work around that solution where we can transfer ownership to a different account. But that's definitely something we might look at in the future.
So Brian, before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about Spree under the hood, and one of the components was one of your projects, Deface. Why don't you give a quick overview of what it does?
Sure. Well, so Deface is like a generic Rails tree library that basically solves a big problem we had. Well, not a big problem, but a problem we had with Spree, earlier versions of Spree, where obviously it ships with a large amount of views, for all the back end and for the relatively basic front end. And a lot of times, when you're customizing Spree, you just want to make one small change. You want to, add in an extra button here or, add an extra column to a table or something relatively trivial. And while we did have kind of helper hooks kind of dribbled all over the place in the views to try and help you kind of hook stuff in there, invariably it was never in the right place. And during my time at RailsDog, I literally designed hundreds of Spree stores and I constantly putting my head up against this problem. So Deface was kind of my pet project to scratch my own itch in the true open source sense. So what Deface lets you do is, first of all, it allows us get rid of the hooks from the views, and basically you can target a view in Rails, and basically using CSS selectors, you can target any element on the page, be it a div tag or actual ERP Ruby code itself. And you can substitute that then with a different snippet of code or render a partial into the file. It's a pretty complicated process. It took me a while to figure out exactly how to make it work, but under the hood of Deface, it basically hooks into the action view part of Rails, and when it's actually compiling the template from the file on the disk, it hooks in there and grabs the source and basically does some parsing on the source of the ERB file and converts it into basically XML that then is passed off to Nokogiri, and then you can use all the power of Nokogiri's amazing CSS selectors to target anything within that file and make changes. You can insert after, insert before, replace contents. You can set attributes on tags. You can just completely remove something from the file. And then it kind of decompiles it back into proper ERB code and then just hands it back to Rails. And then, Rails renders the view accordingly. So it basically removes the need of having to, copy over an entire view to customize it. And it also gives you the ability then to kind of layer up changes one after the other. So, say like the Spree social extension could include a link to log in via Facebook. And then the Rails Log Radio team can come along later, retarget that override and make some more changes after that to, change its color or whatever, add in some extra tags or something like that. So it basically makes views as customizable as possible without ever having to touch the underlying view. So, and the benefit there is that when Spree upgrades between versions, you don't have to go back and, look at all the views you've overridden and try and merge in the changes or anything like that. Provided that the original HTML hasn't changed too much, your hook will still work and it will still catch on to the same place in the file. And the Face then also gives you this kind of what I call upgrade protection, where you can pass in the original markup that you're replacing. So if the Face notices a change, if you upgrade Spree and then when the override is happening, the Face notices that, the original HTML doesn't match what you say it should match, then it will warn you. So you get kind of built-in protection that way too.
So it's essentially monkey patching your views.
Basically, yeah. It's like taking the decorator pattern for, it's like class eval for your views. Yeah, that's it exactly, yeah.
So sadly, the README says ERB only, no HAML support.
Yeah, well, there's a big issue there. It's impossible to get HAML into, some sort of an XML representation that Nokogiri could handle. So that kind of sank that possibility, unless somebody's willing to write a CSS selector library for HAML in maybe a while before the Face supports it. But we are looking at allowing you to supply HAML as the replacement markup. So that may appease the HAML gods.
Yeah, so you could just say, hey, replace this section with this snippet of HAML.
Basically.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Now, I'm finding I'm using a lot more engines and projects these days, and it seems like the common thread around all of these is I want to turn off the entire view layer from a lot of these projects. I'm finding that models and controllers are pretty well thought through, but views tend to be very project specific and a lot of times just not very well written.
Yeah, that's why
Sorry, Sean. That's technically true for Spree as well. And we kind of make that point. We keep the front end of Spree very, very basic because everybody wants their store to look different. So we just have a very semantic, very basic, easy to start front end in terms of views that you can customize. But invariably, most people will almost throw that completely away. But then the inverse of that is the back end. It's a very full featured back end. It looks pretty nice. And people don't really care too much about what their backend looks like. They just want to get in there and process orders and, deliver shipments and edit products and do all the fun jobs of running an e-commerce store. So that's where the Face really shines, in that it lets you just, make your small little changes to the admin side of things without, shooting yourself in the foot for future upgrades, basically.
So we've actually, when kind of in tandem with this Deface and Rails Dog Radio effort, we actually took the views, the front-end views in Spree. They were already pretty plain, and we made them really plain. In fact, when people started seeing the code, they thought that the asset pipeline was broke because there was no styling, and we're going to have to put some kind of theme. We're going to have to just put a default theme in there just so people don't freak out totally when they see it, because we really went with a very semantic HTML. We took that to the extreme and just all right, you know what? The views really are a throwaway. So, but if we made them, basic enough, you could probably leverage them with a theme. So that's what we've done. So I agree that the front end stuff, particularly customer facing stuff, is way too specific. I mean, it's not even a question of writing a good view. It's just, the needs are just too specific for any one particular store. So we assume you're going to throw that away.
So I would imagine a big piece of this project is just communicating news out to the community. So you mentioned hiring someone for that role. What's the latest on that?
Yeah. So, we're really pleased to have hired a new community manager. So starting in a couple days here will be Ryan Big. So your audience, some of your audiences at least would be familiar with him.
Yes.
Yeah. Ruby Hero award winner last year, and Rails 3 in Action, et cetera, et cetera. And, really the ideal community manager, when I look at the criteria. So we were very, fortunate to get him. He was working on a Spree project when I contacted him, and we just happened to kind of catch him at the right time. And, but his dedication to really making open source awesome and helping people learn and all of that. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a better person for that job in almost any programming language. So great guy, very technical, but also very helpful and supportive. And we really want to try to. So hiring a community manager in general was an effort. Was a goal of ours with the funding. And interestingly, you'd be surprised that the idea came from somebody sort of on the VC side of it, right? Like a business type person told me, hey, you should hire a community manager. Mm-hmm. So it's cool that, it's not all and we were like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and Brian and I are really, doing a lot of the running of the community. We have a couple other core members that help as well. But this guy, Ryan will be that'll be 100% his job, right? So, we'll continue to help and both in for people who have the paid support as well as the free community, IRC and mailing lists and stuff. But, we wanted somebody who's, whose sole job is to help the community and we could use some more Ryan Big love for our documentation. And he's already, he hasn't even started, and he's already helping a lot with a namespacing issue. So he's already got several dozen commits under his belt, and he hasn't even started. So we're hoping for great things from him.
Well, congratulations to you and to Ryan. That definitely would be win-win. I see that TB Dubs is also a backer and an advisor. I want to know if he has given you grief over your lack of semantic versioning.
You're talking about Majambo?
Yes, you're at Spree 07.
Oh, no, he hasn't. No, is that a big thing for him?
Yeah, if you go to semver.org, SEMVER. So basically, if it's production, it should be 1.0. We are guilty of this as well. So
okay, no, it will be. It will be. So the next version will be, whatever. Within the end of the year, we're going to be at 1.0. Because there's a 0.80 so we're working on the 1.0 now. So by the time this broadcast airs, the master branch will probably be labeled 1.0, and the naming just kind of got away with us. We had 0.12, and we got to 0.9, and then we weren't ready, so we were like, okay, 0.10. And we wanted to reserve the right to make major changes. I guess we could have done 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, but it really took a couple years to kind of. It was running production, but we were never fully satisfied, and we're there now. Like we feel like it'll keep moving forward, but soon everybody will be happy with a 1.0 release.
We do the same thing. This will be episode 0.6.9, and we get tweets at least once a week. Your version numbers aren't semantic.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, whatever. We're doing our best, but. We didn't want to signal that it was beta software, really. I mean, this is, I guess, in the Google, sort of like extended beta. But I do feel like we've reached this 1.0 point where it's like, okay, we're going to make a little bit of disruption here with the namespace and things, break a couple more things, and, we'll get people straightened out. But I think Rails and Spree have converged a lot. There were so many things that we were doing that Rails wasn't doing, and we're in a lot more in alignment with Rails now. So we were this is going back to this engine discussion. We had our own extension system it would have been fine if we had nothing and then we could have just used Rails engines. But since we had something that was almost like Rails engines, we had a lot of work to back it out. And with the I18N stuff, we were using Globalize, right, Brian? Like before it really became part of Rails I18N, and so there were a lot of things that we were doing that were kind of ahead of the curve. I mean, that we weren't leading the charge. We were just kind of taking other people's great stuff, but a lot of that Rails has sort of caught up to some of those great ideas, and I think we're closer in sync with what Rails is doing. I think Rails is kind of stabilizing too. So I think it's time now. Yeah, I mean there are probably people who aren't going to use it because it's not 1.0, so we should probably fix it.
So we're to the point of the show now. We're going to ask you, kind of turn it around and ask each of you what is on your open source radar and what project other than Spree that when you have a spare Saturday afternoon, what do you like to hack on?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working on an extension to Deface recently that uses an external library which is called ACE, which is the Ajax Cloud 9 editor. And it basically gives you kind of a very rich browser-based syntax highlighting editor for stuff like CSS and JavaScript and HTML and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a pretty cool project.
Brian, is that going to make its way into the theme editor for Spree eventually?
That's where it's going, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
So Brian also has a pretty cool theme editor for Deface that he's working on. So, now that I'm running the company and full bore on Spree, I don't look at as much open source as I should probably, but I think there's some projects that are on my radar that you will probably see in a Spree context soon are I've always been kind of interested in Radiant, and now more so, or not more so, but more recently Refinery. So at RailsDog they use Refinery for a non-Spree project, and Refinery has been very aggressive about moving. It's in many ways it's a project that's similar to Spree, so I would keep an eye on that one. Like it's been going on for a few years. They have over 100 contributors. They're dedicated guys and they're doing a lot of they're keeping up with Rails, and it's just very active. And I think there's a big cry from the CMS community for we need better e-commerce and vice versa. So I think there's some interesting possibilities there. The other thing is I'm interested in Rails admin. One of your previous guests, recent guests, Eric, I won't pronounce his last name.
Michael Zober.
Yeah, Michael Zober. I think he's on to something there. I mean, there's some interesting projects. I don't know that we can use Rails admin for Spree, but we'll probably end up borrowing some from it. And, in general, I have an interest in an Uber sort of admin. An admin, that could be pluggable, that could be really used across engines, I think. So that's probably the biggest barrier to integrating with Radiant or Refinery or Browser or any of these other CMSs is like, anything that requires authentication or authorization, it's going to be a little bit of an issue until we solve this problem. So, having some kind of generic interface that you can then plug your security mechanism of your choice in, and then plug in Spree and Refinery and whatever, I think that'll be cool. And I know Ryan was sort of excited about that. So that's an new open source project that we'll probably start that you can look for and that we'll want help with. And we'll probably be borrowing, from Rails admin and some of the other cool stuff that people are working on.
Well, the Django guys are laughing at us because they have a lot of that out of the box, but hopefully the Rails community can pick a winner in this space and we can get some nice, easy-to-use admin.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with Django, but I would certainly not laugh at that at any point. I think it's a great idea. I mean, I remember Yehuda Katz at, RailsConf. Were you on the Vegas one, Wynn?
Yes,
you were there. I saw you there.
Yep.
You spoke. So, Yehuda gave this talk, and he was talking about Django, I think specifically, and he was saying that we should build on the shoulders of those who've come before us, no matter how small, or something, some kind of reference to stature there. But a good idea is a good idea. I mean, and there's good.
No, I meant laughing because Django has this out of the box. I think we need to.
Oh, I know,
yeah.
and people would deride other frameworks and things.
Right.
But hey, there might be things that aren't good about Django, but I think, if they've, and I don't know much about it, but if they have got that, yeah, that's something that we should be taking a page out of. And I mean, Yehuda made a big point of that and saying, hey, we need to have, there are elements of these communities that are really good and things they're doing that we should build on. And that was something that he very much envisioned when he was talking about the Rails 3 engines a few years ago now. And, WordPress and other communities like, one of our advisors is Dries Bottart, the creator of Drupal. He's an advisor to not to the Spree project, but to the Spree company. And, I've always been an admirer of the Drupal ecosystem. And, not all of it, and I'm not a big PHP fan, but they've got a great, huge, vibrant ecosystem that powers, a big part of the internet. And same with the WordPress guys and, the people who our investors are the same investors behind WordPress. So I definitely think that we have a lot to learn from other open source projects. That's a big, the better, the more we kind of accept that, the better our stuff will be.
Well, we're definitely excited about the news, the venture funding. Hopefully it'll lead to some better docs and a little bit more of a community curation as staffing permits. But we look forward to the upcoming conference and keep us posted on the roadmap for Spree.
Yeah, we look forward to being enthralled by your talk. Pressure's on.
No pressure.
All right.
Thanks,
cool.
fellas.
All right. Thank you.